He rushed through the woods as a high-pitched screech echoed behind him. Panic surged through his entire body as one thought went through his mind. Need to find someplace to hide. He knew it was his only chance since the thing chasing him was one of the faster ones. He nearly screamed in joy as a large tree with big roots came into view. He dived beneath the roots, praying to whatever god would listen that his dark brown jacket would help him to blend in. Terror consumed him as the creature emerged from some nearby bushes. Oh shit, he thought as he stared into the huge empty sockets where its eyes should be. He placed a hand over his face to muffle his breathing, and to protect his nose from that putrid stench. He wondered if the smell came from the black substance leaking from the creature's mouth and eye holes. How could something so rotten looking even exist? He felt himself shudder as the thing lifted its pale head. He then realized that it must be listening for any signs of movement, or worse, sniffing for his scent. Its bony jaw opened wide, seeming to unhinge, and showing off those long, razor-sharp teeth. He nearly gasped as the creature's deer-like skull whipped around in his direction. Those two black holes seeming to stare, somehow, right at him. He shifted further into the tree as it placed one large, bony hand forward, its claws digging deep into the dirt. The black substance coming from its mouth seemed to increase as it crept closer. The viscous liquid practically gushed from between its fangs. Suddenly, it paused, the thing tilting its skull to the side. The thing jolted its head to a different direction. Then, letting out a high-pitched wail, it dashed off. Ben shut his eyes tight as he thought of that day. It was yet another near-death experience that he would have to live with. One of many. He tried to remember what number that encounter was. Then, he shook his head, deciding not to dwell on it. He had lost count years ago, anyway. Ben stared intently into the fire. He wondered how much longer he'd be able to deal with all this. All these different creatures, these cryptids, as they were called. He wondered if he could even survive another encounter. "Hey," a male voice called, breaking him from his trance. Ben lifted his brown eyes from the fire to the bearded man sitting across from him. "You doing all right?" the man asked. Ben blinked twice, his mind blank. He then bowed his head, studying a nearby leaf. "Yeah, I'll be fine. Don't worry about it, Jeff." A small part of Ben absolutely despised when Jeff did this. Every single day for the past 5, maybe 6 months that they've known each other, he'd always pop up saying, "Hey, you doing alright?" It's like a catchphrase at this point. Sure, Ben did feel grateful for it, yes. But he kinda just wanted to think in silence most of the time. Jeff leaned forward. Narrowing his eyes, he spoke. "You sure? You look a little worried." Ben shrugged his shoulders. His head slowly spun around as he tried to take in their surroundings, his eyes darting from tree to tree. "You don't have to always be so paranoid, you know," Jeff said. "It's the middle of the night, we're surrounded by trees, and next to a loud river. Ain't nothing gonna find us out here." He smiled as he finished. Ben switched his gaze to the river as he thought, "How can you be sure of that?" Jeff snickered at this. Come on, try to have a little faith in your planning at least. He lifted a hand, pinching his finger and thumb together. "Just a little, okay?" Ben laughed. "Oh yes, Ye of a billion faith? Sure. They continued chuckling, even after Ben finished. Slowly, it grew quiet. Ben felt himself relax as he listened to the crackling fire. It was one of the few things that made him feel calm now. Just as Ben felt himself settle down, though, a loud snap sounded from nearby. Ben cringed as the sound rang in his ear. He looked to Jeff, who stared back, wide-eyed with terror. Jeff slowly turned his head, and Ben watched as his mouth began to hang ajar. Ben looked to where Jeff's attention was to see a bright red glowing orb near the ground. He couldn't make out what it belonged to, as it was hidden amongst the shadows of the trees. What did the red orbs mean again? Jeff asked, his voice shaky. Ben felt himself shiver as the thought crossed his mind. He knew exactly what those belonged to. The thing that crouched before them may not be one of the fastest, but it sure as hell was one of the strongest. Ben, Jeff hissed. What is it? It's a werewolf, Ben stammered. They hadn't encountered one of those in a while. Jeff cursed under his breath as he rose to his feet, the orb rising along with him. Ben felt his hand shake uncontrollably as it rose to 8 feet in height, if he'd have to guess. Ben narrowed his eyes as sweat formed on his face. Something was wrong. Why was there only one orb when there should be 2? He hoped it wasn't the last one they fought. Although they managed to hurt it, it would not die. It barely escaped with their lives. The creature stepped forward, causing Ben to feel bile rise in his throat as its muzzle came into view. While the top half of its muzzle was covered in black fur, the jaw is what disturbed him the most. It was all bone, not a trace of fur or even meat to be found. The creature took another step forward, revealing more of its ghoulish features. While yes, it was definitely a werewolf, it looked all wrong. Ben felt panic begin to grow more and more as he made out 2 large deer antlers protruding from its head. A fear he had was confirmed as he stared directly into a black hole where its left eye should be. It let out a low growl as large quantities of a black liquid gushed from its mouth. Ben slowly picked himself up as Jeff pulled out a large military knife. He knew this wasn't something they could face, not this time. Ben began to inch backward in the direction of the river. He knew exactly what Jeff planned to do, and as much as he wanted to tell him, to call out to him and scream that it wasn't worth it, he knew there wasn't any use. Jeff always picked fight over flight whenever he could. There was no convincing him, even with this thing, this abomination standing before them. Ben rushed away, diving into the river as the wolf lunged at Jeff with a snarl. He did not want to stick around for the inevitable outcome. As Ben drifted downstream, his thoughts whirled, landing on a fact that he never thought would come. One that never could have been expected in the several years that he had spent in this apocalypse. A thought that he realized as soon as he saw that empty socket leaking that black fluid. A thought that terrified him. They're breeding?